Gracious and loving God, so overrule my words, that your words may be heard and being heard, may be believed and being believed, may be lived. Amen. Amen. You can see it. Before I start my sermon that I prepared earlier this week, I must comment that the events in cities across America had me considering carrying out the sermon completely and starting from scratch yesterday afternoon. This morning I found a profound and moving statement from our presiding bishop in my email from the Episcopal News Service. He speaks on the subject with a depth of feeling and understanding that I cannot have, for I have not experienced what Michael Curry experienced growing up in a segregated world as an African American. I posted the link to the statement on the church's Facebook page, and I urge all of you to take some time after this morning's service to read it and pray about what you may feel called to do to react. It speaks far more eloquently than anything I can say. I've adjusted a few comments, but as I looked at it, I found that my sermon was actually a call to live into our baptismal promises, and that's probably the best thing that we can do. So as we conclude one of the most unusual Easter seasons I have ever experienced as a member of a parish, a seminarian, or a priest, I keep going back to what I wondered the whole time, because I believe we are experiencing and feeling maybe very close to what the early church experienced in those beginning days. On this Pentecost Sunday, I do want to make one thing absolutely clear. The church is not closed. Let me say that again. The church is not closed. We may not be meeting in person yet in the way we are accustomed, but we are open and worshiping as a faithful community. You carry nothing else away from this morning's service. It's the idea that the church is not a building, but a community of people gathered to worship, and more importantly, to follow Jesus in the world. Now, some refer to Pentecost as the birthday of the church. And in fact, it is the day when the church became a group of followers of Jesus that has really continued on for almost 2,000 years and truly began the journey to where we are here in 2020. I have an early experience will illustrate some of what I'm talking about when I talk about the church being more than just a building. When I was still serving at Holy Spirit on Cape Cod as curate and then assistant rector, the rector announced to the bishop that he intended to retire. The bishop called me and told me he wanted me in a new parish before this retirement was announced to the parish. Among places I interviewed a parish in western Massachusetts near Tanglewood, the summer home of the Boston Symphony. It was a historic church built, I believe, in the 1870s in the center of town on Main Street, but had a small and shrinking congregation. They were looking to revitalize and grow, and after the interview, I knew that this was not going to be a good fit for me. There were some significant challenges I saw in them, and I didn't think as a first-time rector with only 3 years' experience, I was ready to handle it. At that point, they wanted to grow, mostly to balance the budget. And I can tell you, if that's your growth motivation, you're in trouble. After a long search, they called a friend of mine who was nearing the end of her career and was looking for one final challenge. I asked her why. She said they had done a lot of work in between my interview and hers. I think it was 2 years, in fact. And she was ready to accept the position. And I knew she had the experience to take them where they needed to go. Fast forward a few months, and one day, all of a sudden, the wall of the stone chancel collapsed and fell on her car. A survey of the building produced a repair bill of $1.5 million for a congregation with 65 on a Sunday. They did a most remarkable thing. They gave up their building and started to meet in the banquet hall of the local brewery and rented office space at the hospital. They started looking around town for ministries and freed from the expense of that historic building. Hooked up with a food pantry, a local farmer who was struggling. And with their assistance, the farmer produced food for the food bank and managed to keep his farm. They became essential to the community in a way that they never had been before. And surprise for surprises, they started to attract new members. And they grew. And now, 10 years later, they are poster children for what it means to be a missional community. They learn the difference between going to church and being the church. That's what happens when you learn to open yourself to the Spirit. One thing I've learned is that the Spirit speaks in many and varied ways. Look at our story of the disciples receiving the Spirit once in John and once in Acts. And they are totally different experiences. In John, Jesus greets the disciples on that Easter Eve with the words, "Peace be with you." And he breathes on the disciples and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." A gentle, quiet gift from the Spirit, and it's sending out into the world. In Acts, 50 days later, we have something entirely different. The sound like a rushing wind, notice it's the sound, fills the house. There are tongues like a fire, and the chaos of people speaking in different languages. The noise and commotion is so great that people from all over Jerusalem come to see what is going on. All very dramatic. Then Peter, inspired by the Spirit, gives what is probably the first sermon of the church and quotes the book of Joel with those very end-of-the-world sounding speeches, and then continues on beyond where our passage goes. Now, my experience of the Spirit includes both that quiet voice, that gentle nudge, telling me to get going. But there have also been times in my life when the Spirit has taken the whole like 2x4 to the side of my head and said, "Now that I have your attention, will you please listen to me?" Sometimes the Spirit seizes on a mode of challenge like we face right now and says, "Are you paying attention? I have something for you to do." We also need to remember that that early church had no buildings, no liturgy, no traditions. Most of what we are missing right now is something the early church could not even imagine in that first 50 or 60 years. In fact, by the time the Gospels were written, even the great temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed, and the city has been laid waste by the Romans. The early church was creating everything that we now take for granted from scratch in a hostile environment on top of it. To use a modern analogy, they were building the plane as they flew it. And so are we right now. Over the past couple days, I've been trying to build that airplane a little bit. I've been working on a technology grant from the diocese. This is funding to help us purchase and set up video and audio equipment that will improve our live streaming capabilities, so I'm doing something more than operating with my iPhone on a selfie stick. Now, this is something I've been thinking about, but it was very much a back burner issue for me until about 10 weeks ago, and then it became a front burner issue. The grant asked for a vision statement about technology in our parish and how this fits our mission. So I've been working on that. Then I'll need to train some folks on how to run the video system on Sunday mornings. So our worship team will now have ushers, altar guild lectors, Eucharistic mentors, and a video tech. And yes, I'm looking for some volunteers. That wasn't on the radar screen 3 months ago. Talk about building an airplane while we're flying it. Yes, as crazy as it seems, I find this moment incredibly exciting. Just like the early church, we have some new possibilities, new ways to be church, and share the love of God with a world that desperately needs it. I'm not discouraged, but encouraged about the future. For I believe the Spirit is doing something new. I do want to end with one more important thought that guides us as we look at what this is we are called to do. And this is where the sermon really ties into the events of the past 3 days. If I was doing a baptism this Pentecost, after baptizing the person with water, I would take my thumb and tip it in the chrism oil and put it on the forehead of that new Christian. say the words which for me are the most important words of the whole baptism service. You are sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. This is your moment, your personal Pentecost moment, when that was done to you, or will be when I do that to you. When I'm doing the preparation for baptism, I stop here and ask the person being baptized if they're old enough, or the parents an important question. How can you live in such a way that that cross on your forehead becomes visible to the entire world? How do you show the world that you are a follower of Christ? The disciples obviously lived life, showed the world who they were and what they were. All those in that room lived a life lit by the heavenly fire that proclaimed who they are. Just a couple minutes, we will reaffirm our baptismal vows with those 5 important questions that give us a very good outline for living a life that will make that cross on your forehead shine as bright as the fire of Pentecost. In particular, are the challenges to persevere in resisting evil, proclaiming by word and example the good news, seeking to serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself, and striving for justice and peace among all people, and respecting the dignity of every human being. This is how we fight what is going on in our world today. This is what you promise to do every time you repeat the baptismal covenant, at every baptism that we do. These words have great power on a morning like this, and we're all called to respond. The Spirit is calling us to be the church, and I know we can all do this because we do it with God's help.